Sri Aurobindo is describing the nature and role of renunciation in the integral yoga, and after describing all the things that it is not supposed to be, he moves now to the affirmation of what it truly is. And so first of all, he says, renunciation of world existence is forbidden to us because we seek to realize our unity with God completely, and the world is part of the divine, cannot be separated from the divine. Therefore, renunciation must be for us merely an instrument and not an object. It cannot even be a chief instrument because we are seeking something positive, and this is a negative. Second, he says, our renunciation must obviously be an inward renunciation because we are not renouncing the world. Anything external would involve renouncing things of the world or the world itself, and therefore it has to be an internal renunciation. And what is it? Above all, he says, a renunciation of attachment and craving of desire in the senses and the heart. Second, of self-will in the thought and action. And third, of egoism in the center of the consciousness. For these things are the three knots by which we are bound to our lower nature. He says, if these three can be renounced utterly, then there is nothing else that can bind us. Now, obviously, when we explore these three things, we find they are spread out all over. Even if there are three focal points that have been referred to, the very first one, renunciation of attachment and craving of desire in the senses and the heart, it goes through into all the parts of our being, although its focus is in the heart and in the senses, because our whole being leans through the heart and through the senses into the world. The second, which is renunciation of self-will in the thought and action. If you observe the nature of human life, almost everything is determined in terms of self-will, self-interest, self-assertion. If you somehow are able to suppress that, there is no person left. There is no individuality even. And third, the renunciation of egoism in the center of our consciousness. And this, as we are well aware, is such a complex thing. It is so multifaceted and multi-layered, and it changes form so easily. We may feel as if we have removed the ego, and then it pops up in the very act of the removing of the ego. It comes as a masked magician to remove the ego and claims it is free of ego. You must have seen there are many magic shows in which a magician comes on stage and he takes somebody, covers him up. The magician is on stage and he is covered up by his assistants, and suddenly the cover is removed and he has vanished. And then one of the assistants who has helped to cover him now removes a mask, and we find it is the magician. So he has as if transported himself from this person into the other person. And this is the skill of the ego. If you try to expunge the ego, who is it making the effort? and the ego slips into the very person who makes the effort. And now this which is removed, it feels as if the ego is gone, but the one who attempted to remove the ego himself is the ego, and he remains now in a different form. So these are very difficult when seen in terms of their entrenchment in the whole being. And yet these are the three things. And if we are able to do this, then there is nothing else that can bind us, he says. Therefore, and now he expands on each of these three, what it means and how far it is to be done. And the first of these is the removal of attachment and desire from the senses and the heart. And this we had read last time. He has a long list of things from which we must remove all attachment and desire. Nothing in the world to which we must be attached, not wealth, nor poverty, nor joy, nor suffering, nor life, nor death, nor greatness, nor littleness, and so on. Reading that list, we find these pairs of opposites, and it reminds us somehow of a very great, famous chant of Adi Shankaracharya, where he declares himself, I am not this, not that, not that. Those of you who are familiar with that chant will recall the similarity, the denial of a series of things, one after another, all the way to the most essential things. And that is one part, one aspect. But Sri Aurobindo's description here takes us to a complementary renunciation also. When he says, nor vice, nor virtue, nor friend, nor wife, nor children, and so on, nor heaven, nor earth, nor all that is within them or beyond them. But in this denial or renunciation, there is not the renunciation of love or of delight. It is not a flattening or a numbing or a erasing or destruction of the heart and its true expression. And he explains what is the nature of true love and true delight. He says attachment is egoism in love and not love itself. Similarly, desire is limitation and insecurity in the hunger for pleasure and satisfaction, but not the seeking after the divine delight in things. So when we remove desire, when we remove attachment, there is still the possibility of the experience of true love and the divine delight in things. And that love, he says, can be eternally intense beyond even the most violent passions which are only brief. Or the delight in things, because it is rooted in the divine, not in the form, it can embrace the whole universe without getting caught in its meshes. So this is the first of the three elaborations. Next, he takes up the elaboration of renunciation of self-will in the thought and action. And this is a whole paragraph in itself, after which he takes up the renunciation of the egoism. So he will look at the renunciation of self-will. Self-will in thought and action has, we have already seen, to be quite renounced if we would be perfect in the way of divine works. And this is part of discussions in a chapter earlier in the Yoga of Works. It has equally to be renounced if we are to be perfect in divine knowledge. So the practices there in the Yoga of Works would automatically dovetail into the Yoga of Knowledge for this purpose. And this we will see is one of the common features in all the three, Yoga of Works, Yoga of Knowledge, and Yoga of Love. Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, that there will have to be a complete renunciation of self-will. And this will be therefore one of the common platforms on which the full integral yoga can develop. This self-will means an egoism in the mind, which attaches itself to its preferences, its habits, its past or present formations of thought and view and will, because it regards them as itself or its own, weaves around them the delicate threads of I-ness and my-ness and lives in them like a spider in its web. Just one single sentence, but it has so many subtle psychological insights and observations, as well as clues to liberation. First he says, this sense of self-will, I do, I have to do, my importance, he says, is an egoism in the mind which attaches itself to certain things. Because in the mind, I have the sense of I. And in my mind, the I which I experience is for me the center of the whole universe. Even, although we don't say it in so many words, we feel as if, subjectively, we feel as if I'm not there, what will happen? So especially this becomes obvious when you are in charge of a certain activity. You are the head of a work which is to be organized. If I am not there, what will happen? If you have built up a whole institution, again this illusion becomes very strong. If I am not there. But as is our experience in the world, when somebody is not there, somebody has passed on, after a very brief moment of grief, the work itself never stops. The world and society, humanity just organizes itself now. There is an automatic transition, somebody takes up the activities, everything goes on as if you never mattered. And it's useful to remind ourselves of this, that if somehow we are gone from the physical world, we discard the body, nothing is going to change actually. People will find their way, they will be just as comfortable without you as they are with you. But this sense of I-ness and the importance we have in I have to do, therefore, I cannot let go, it's my responsibility. It takes on a very strong force. Sri Aurobindo himself describes how he was in this trap when he had organized the freedom struggle in India. It was a huge task. Consider that when he entered the independence movement, there was no concept of an independence movement. There was only the appeals and requests that the Congress made to the British colonial masters, asking for better governance, better facilities and comforts for the people, and that was it. The concept of ever being free was unimaginable, impossible. And Sri Aurobindo had to bring that in, awaken that nationwide as an ideal, not only as a possibility, but an ideal to be worked for, an ideal that people might never see in their lifetime, and yet they will commit themselves to, and then to organize the grassroots movement of revolution across cities. And it is quite surprising how far he went and how much he worked for this. And all this he was doing secretly. People had heard his name being mentioned, whispered. Nobody really knew who he was, where he was, what he did. They just knew he is behind it. And that's about it. I was just 2 days ago in Amravati. It's a very small town today, after all the development and the tripling of India's population since those days. It's a small enough town that you can go from anywhere to anywhere within 10 minutes. Okay? So in that town, there is a hall where Sri Aurobindo spoke, and the table at which he sat when he spoke is still kept there. Of course, subsequently, not only he, but other very famous leaders have sat and spoken there, including Annie Besant, uh, Tilak, and Mahatma Gandhi, and so on. So there are 9 names which are written on the table of famous people who have spoken there. But if you consider the size of the hall, it would be perhaps about twice as big as this. What it would mean at that time, when Amravati was such a small space, he came there, spoke, organized, it was not just speeches, organized the space, brought it into the network for the revolution, and moved on. And everywhere that he went, there was this work continuing, and people inspired who were taking it up, and then his writings. All that was going on, and that's when he got the inner Adesh that now he has to withdraw and dedicate his energies on an inner work. And he couldn't do it. And when he could not do it, that's when a month later he was arrested and put in solitary confinement. And when he complained, why is this? I have dedicated myself for the country, and why do I have to suffer this? That's when Sri Krishna pointed out to him, you remember a month ago you had got this Adesh, you could not free yourself, and so I have cut your attachments. But this idea, what will happen without me? Especially when we have done so much, organized so much. From this perspective of the I center in the mind, it feels as if everything is revolving around my priorities, because that's how I've trained myself to look at things. And attaches itself. An egoism in the mind which attaches itself to its preferences, habits, past and present formations of thoughts, and view and will. So these are 3 broad categories. We have preferences. Well, we like our body to be of a certain temperature, we like certain foods, and so on. And because we are used to those preferences generally, we attach ourselves to them sufficiently that if the preference changes, we feel irritated. We have habits. I get up at this time, I have to do this, I have to do that. If nothing else, I have to drink a cup of tea, and so on. And if the tea does not come, my body cannot wake up. Or if I do not receive what I need in the way I want, I lose self-control. I remember once I was sitting with the head of an institution, a very big elite institution of India, one of the management institutions. We had breakfast, sitting with the head, and somebody brings 2 glasses of orange juice which have been freshly squeezed. And when I drink the orange juice, there's the smell of onion. Because he's used the same knife which was used to cut the onion to cut the orange. So I was drinking it, okay,